Sign the divorce papers." The words cut through the bedroom like a blade through silk. Cold, clean, final. Octavia Kendrick stood in the doorway of what used to be her master bedroom, watching her husband of 5 years hold out a leather folder with the confidence of a man who'd already won. 3 weeks had passed since she'd found them together. Darius and Simone, tangled in sheets Octavia herself had picked out on their honeymoon in Santorini. 3 weeks since her world had shattered into pieces so small she wasn't sure they could ever be reassembled. But here stood Darius Whitmore, 6'3" of designer suit and calculated cruelty, acting like this was just another business transaction. Behind him, lounging on the cream chaise by the window, sat Simone Baptiste, the woman Octavia had hired, paid generously, treated with respect. The 24-year-old wore one of Octavia's silk robes, the champagne-colored one that had cost $3,000. Around her neck glittered Octavia's grandmother's pearls. The audacity of it made Octavia's chest tighten, but she kept her face smooth as glass. "The house is in my name," Darius continued, his voice carrying that boardroom authority he used when closing multi-million-dollar deals. "The cars are in my name. The accounts—" He paused, letting the weight of it sink in. "Well, you get the picture." Octavia's hands trembled at her sides. She pressed them against her thighs, willing them to stop. The November sunlight streaming through the floor-to-ceiling windows highlighted every detail of this moment. The smug curl of Simone's lips, the diamond cufflinks on Darius's wrists that Octavia had given him last Christmas. The unsigned papers on the marble counter between them. "Hi, viewers. Kindly tell us where you're watching from and what time it is." $2 million, Darius said, tapping the folder. "That's more than generous, considering you came into this marriage with nothing." The emphasis on that last word landed like a slap. "I'm giving you a fresh start, Octavia. Most men wouldn't be so kind." Simone shifted on the chaise, crossing her legs with deliberate slowness. "It really is generous, Mrs. Whitmore." Her voice dripped honey and venom in equal measure. "Darius told me how you grew up. Baltimore projects, right? A single mother working 3 jobs?" She tilted her head, sympathy painted thick across her features. "This settlement could change your whole family's life." The mention of her mother, the woman who'd sacrificed everything to put Octavia through Howard University, made something hot and sharp rise in Octavia's throat. But she swallowed it down, pushed it deep. Her mother had taught her that survival meant keeping your cards close and your enemies closer. "I built this with you," Octavia said quietly, her voice steady despite the earthquake in her chest. "Every property acquisition, every negotiation, every late night analyzing markets while you—" She stopped herself, drew in a breath. "I made you richer." Darius laughed. Actually laughed. "You worked for me, sweetheart. There's a difference." He moved closer, and Octavia caught the scent of his cologne, the one she used to love, now turned sour. "You were good for business. I'll give you that. Your analytical mind, your attention to detail." He glanced back at Simone, who was examining her manicure with theatrical disinterest. "But Simone here? She's good for everything else." The cruelty was intentional, precise, designed to break her. Behind them, Simone whispered something Octavia couldn't quite hear. Darius's lips curved into a smile, intimate, knowing. They both looked at Octavia then, and in perfect synchronization, they laughed. The sound echoed off the vaulted ceilings, bounced off the imported Italian marble, filled every corner of the home Octavia had made beautiful. Her face remained expressionless. Not because she'd mastered some zen state of detachment, but because her mind was already 3 moves ahead, calculating angles, measuring leverage. planning destruction so complete Darius wouldn't see it coming until it was far too late. "You came from nothing," Darius repeated, his voice dropping to that patronizing tone he used when explaining basic concepts to people he considered beneath him. "And that's exactly what you'll leave with. Nothing." He slid the papers across the counter toward her, along with a platinum pen. "Sign, take your $2 million, and disappear quietly. Or don't sign. And my lawyers will drag this out for years while you drain whatever savings you think you have on legal fees. Your choice." Octavia's hand reached for the papers. Her fingers touched the cool leather of the folder. Darius's smile widened. Victorious. Final. He'd won. He knew it. Simone knew it. The whole world would soon know it. But Octavia's hand stopped, withdrew. She looked up at her husband, correction, her soon-to-be ex-husband, and smiled. Small, controlled, the smile of a woman who knew something he didn't. "I'll sign," she said softly. "But not today." Darius's smile flickered for just a second. "Octavia," I said, "I'll sign." She turned toward the door, her modest flats making no sound on the marble. "Just not today." "You're making this harder than it needs to be," Darius called after her. His voice carried an edge now, the first crack in his composed exterior. "You can't fight this. You have nothing. No resources, no leverage, no—" Octavia paused in the doorway, looked back over her shoulder. "You're right," she said. "I have nothing." The lie tasted bitter on her tongue, but she delivered it flawlessly. "I'll be in touch about the signing." She walked down the curved staircase, through the foyer with its crystal chandelier, past the living room where she'd once imagined her children would play. Out the front door, into the November cold. Her car, a modest Toyota Camry she'd kept despite Darius's insistence she drive something more appropriate, sat in the circular driveway next to his Bentley and Simone's new Mercedes, the one Darius had bought her last month. Octavia slid behind the wheel, closed the door, and sat in silence. Her hands shook now, really shook. The trembling spread up her arms, into her shoulders, until her whole body vibrated with rage, humiliation, and something else, something colder. Her phone buzzed in her purse. She pulled it out with numb fingers. A text from Marcus Chen, her attorney. The attorney Darius knew nothing about. "Trust activates in 180 days. Everything is in place. Stay the course." Octavia stared at the message, read it twice, 3 times. Let the meaning sink deep into her bones. 180 days, 6 months. That's all she needed to wait before the inheritance clause in her grandfather's trust activated. Maxwell Kendrick had been a self-made millionaire, the only person besides her mother who'd believed Octavia could be anything she wanted. When he died 5 years ago, he'd left her $85 million, with one condition. She couldn't tell anyone. Not her mother, not her husband, not a single living soul. If she revealed the inheritance before the 5-year mark, she'd lose everything. 5 years of silence. 5 years of watching Darius treat her like a charity case he'd elevated. 5 years of building an empire in the shadows while he paraded his wealth like a crown. Octavia looked up at the mansion. Through the second-floor window, she could see Darius and Simone. He had his arm around her waist. They were laughing again. She started the car. Darius Whitmore had no idea what he'd just done. He thought he'd discarded her, thrown her away like last season's fashion. He thought she'd sign his papers, take his pity money, and fade into obscurity. He had no idea that Octavia Kendrick had been planning for this exact moment since the day her grandfather died. He had no idea about the shadow empire she'd built using proxy companies and shell corporations. He had no idea that she owned strategic parcels of land adjacent to every single one of his developments. He had no idea that in 6 months, she'd emerge from the shadows with enough wealth to destroy everything he'd ever touched. Most importantly, he had no idea that the woman he'd just humiliated wasn't broken. She was calculating. If you've ever been underestimated by someone who should have cherished you, hit that like button right now. Your comment might be what someone scrolling desperately needs to hear. 5 years before that humiliating afternoon, Octavia sat in a sterile hospital room holding her grandfather's hand while machines beeped their rhythmic countdown to goodbye. Maxwell Kendrick looked smaller than she remembered. The man who'd built a commercial real estate empire from a single condemned building in West Baltimore now weighed maybe 90 pounds. His dark skin stretched thin over bones that seemed too fragile to have ever carried such strength. But his eyes, those sharp, calculating eyes that had assessed property values and human character with equal precision, still burned bright. "Stop crying, baby girl," he whispered, his voice rough as gravel. "Tears don't build empires." Octavia wiped her cheeks with the back of her hand. At 28, she'd just married Darius 3 months prior. Life felt full of possibility. The future stretched ahead like an open road. "I need to tell you something," Maxwell continued, each word costing him effort. "And you need to listen without interrupting. Can you do that?" She nodded. "I'm leaving you $85 million. The number hung in the air between them, impossible and real all at once. Octavia's mouth opened, but Maxwell squeezed her hand with surprising strength. "I said don't interrupt." He coughed, and Octavia reached for the water cup. But he waved it away. "There's a condition. You can't tell anyone about this money, not your mother, not your husband, no one. For 5 years, this inheritance stays secret. You breathe one word of it, you lose everything. The trust dissolves, and the money goes to charity." "But why?" "Because I need to know you can stand on your own 2 feet, Maxwell interrupted. "I need to know that whatever life you build in the next 5 years, you build it with your own hands, your own mind, your own strength." He pulled her closer, his grip surprisingly strong. "Men like your husband, rich men, powerful men, they look at women like us and see stepping stones, pretty faces to polish their image, smart minds to boost their business. But they never see equals." "Darius isn't like that," Octavia protested, though even then, something in her gut whispered uncertainty. Maxwell's laugh turned into a cough. "Maybe he isn't. Maybe you got lucky and found a good one." His eyes locked onto hers. "But if he isn't, if he shows you his true face, I want you to have the power to walk away. Not just walk, soar." He squeezed her hand again. "Promise me you won't tell him." "I promise. Promise me you'll use these 5 years to learn everything you can, build something invisible, create leverage." "I promise, Grandpa. And promise me one more thing." His voice dropped to barely a whisper. "Promise me that if someone betrays you, you won't just survive it. You'll make them regret ever underestimating you." Octavia had laughed then, thinking it dramatic deathbed talk. "I promise." Maxwell Kendrick died that night. The funeral was small. Darius had squeezed her shoulder during the service, whispered that he'd take care of her, that she'd never want for anything. 2 weeks later, she met with Marcus Chen, her grandfather's attorney. He handed her a leather folder containing the trust documents, incorporation papers for 3 shell companies, and a handwritten note from Maxwell. "Let them underestimate you. That's when you strike." Octavia had returned home that evening to find Darius celebrating a new property acquisition. He'd bought a luxury condo complex in downtown Atlanta, convinced it would triple in value within 5 years. He'd been so excited, pulling her into his arms, spinning her around the living room, talking about their future. She'd smiled, congratulated him, kept her mouth shut, and the next morning, Using one of the shell companies her grandfather had established, she'd quietly purchased the two adjacent lots on either side of Darius's new development. That was how it started. The invisible empire. The shadow game. For 5 years, Octavia played the role of devoted wife while secretly building an alternative empire. When Darius thought she was consulting for other firms, she was actually meeting with real estate brokers, tech startup founders, and investment managers, all through proxies who never used her real name. Phoenix Vale Capital, Athena Holdings, Demeter Properties, 3 companies that existed only on paper, with offshore accounts and encrypted communications. 3 companies that slowly, methodically, strategically positioned themselves around every single asset Darius Whitmore owned. She attended his business dinners, smiled at his colleagues, analyzed his deals, and then quietly bought leverage against every single one. When he acquired the Miami Beach properties, she bought the marina access rights. When he developed the Charlotte office complex, she secured the parking garage adjacent to it. When he celebrated his net worth hitting $180 million, she was 3 moves ahead, holding invisible strings that could unravel his entire empire. The work was exhausting. She'd spend days playing the perfect wife, attending galas, hosting dinner parties, laughing at his colleagues' jokes, and then spend nights in her home office, door locked, coding acquisition algorithms and reviewing property assessments until her eyes burned. Darius never suspected. Why would he? She was his partner, his biggest supporter, the woman who loved him. The woman who came from nothing and was grateful for everything he provided. Every property Darius thought he owned outright, Octavia held strategic pieces around it. Every business deal he celebrated, she held leverage against. She wasn't trying to compete with him. She was trying to own him. The irony wasn't lost on her. While Darius paraded their wealth and success, treating her like a prize he'd won, Octavia was quietly building something that would eventually eclipse everything he'd ever touched. And through it all, the late nights, the secret meetings, the careful orchestration, she kept Maxwell's words close. Let them underestimate you. That's when you strike. Now, driving away from the mansion with Darius's divorce papers unsigned and his cruel words still echoing in her ears, Octavia understood why her grandfather had made her wait 5 years. He'd known. Somehow he'd known that she'd need this, that the fairy tale would crack, that the prince would show his true face. 180 days. That's all she needed to wait before the trust activated, before she could reveal what she'd built, before she could show Darius Whitmore what a fatal mistake he'd made. Her phone buzzed again. Another text from Marcus. The trust has grown. With strategic investments over 5 years, total accessible assets will be $127 million, plus your shadow companies hold another $273 million in leveraged real estate. Congratulations, Ms. Kendrick. You're worth $400 million. $400 million. More than double what Darius was worth. Octavia pulled into the parking lot of her new apartment, a modest 2-bedroom in Midtown that Darius would never think to look for her in. She parked between a Honda and a Ford, turned off the engine, and sat in silence. She thought about Simone wearing her robe, her grandmother's pearls. Thought about Darius's laugh, his cruelty, his certainty that she had nothing. A smile curved her lips, small, cold, certain. 180 days, she whispered to herself. That's all I need. She pulled out her laptop, opened it on her steering wheel, and accessed the encrypted server that housed all her Shadow Empire documentation. File after file of strategic acquisitions, proxy holdings, leverage points. Everything Darius had built, she could destroy. Every property he owned, she held the keys to dismantling. Every relationship he valued in the business world, she had the connections to disrupt. But she wouldn't strike now. Not yet. Not when he expected it. She'd wait, build more, position herself perfectly, And when the moment came, when he felt most secure, most victorious, most certain of his power, that's when she'd show him what real power looked like. If this moment moved you, comment, "I am unstoppable" below. Share this with someone who needs to know their power. Octavia closed her laptop, locked her car, walked into her modest apartment building. Darius thought this was the end of their story. He thought he'd won, moved on, upgraded. He had no idea this was just the beginning. The clock was already ticking. And with every day that passed, Octavia Kendrick grew stronger, while Darius Whitmore's empire stood on increasingly unstable ground. Held together by leverage he didn't even know existed. 180 days until everything changed. 180 days until his perfect new life came crashing down. The clock was ticking, and Darius was already losing. 3 months later, Octavia stood in her bathroom staring at a pregnancy test. 2 pink lines. The fluorescent light above the mirror buzzed, casting harsh shadows across her face. Outside her modest midtown apartment, Atlanta traffic hummed its evening symphony. Inside, the world had just shifted on its axis again. Pregnant, with Darius's child. Conceived before she'd found him with Simone, before the divorce papers, before everything fell apart. Her hand trembled as she set the test on the sink counter. Then another thought hit her, sharp and cold. She grabbed her phone, opened Instagram, and immediately wished she hadn't. Darius and Simone's wedding photos dominated her feed, posted 2 hours ago. Already 30,000 likes. The ceremony had taken place at the Four Seasons in downtown Atlanta. Simone wore a custom Vera Wang gown, white silk and crystals that probably cost more than most people's cars. Darius stood beside her in a midnight blue Tom Ford suit, his hand on her waist, his smile wide and victorious. The caption read, "Sometimes you have to lose the wrong one to find your forever." Or new beginnings. Love wins. Power couple. Octavia scrolled through the photos. 200 guests, ice sculptures, a 12-tier cake, champagne towers. The Atlanta business elite gathered to celebrate Darius Whitmore's new chapter, his upgrade, his fresh start. The comment section was worse. "She's so much prettier than the last one. Darius definitely traded up, smart man." The ex-wife was too ambitious, too cold. This is what a real woman looks like. Feminine, soft, supportive. Each comment was a small knife. Octavia kept scrolling anyway, pressing the blade deeper, needing to feel the full weight of public humiliation. There was Simone in the reception photos, laughing with Darius's business partners. Simone cutting the cake, Simone tossing her bouquet, Simone looking at Darius with adoration that might have been genuine or might have been performance art. Octavia couldn't tell anymore, wasn't sure she cared. Her phone buzzed. A text from her mother. "Baby, are you seeing this? Don't look at social media. People are cruel. You're better than all of them combined." Octavia didn't respond. She set the phone down, looked at herself in the mirror. 29 years old, divorced, pregnant, living in a 2-bedroom apartment with furniture from IKEA, while her ex-husband celebrated his new marriage in a ballroom that cost more than most weddings combined. The narrative was writing itself without her input. Darius Whitmore, successful real estate mogul, had moved on from his cold, ambitious first wife, found love with a younger, warmer, more supportive woman, built a new life, won. And Octavia? She was the cautionary tale, the woman who'd gotten above her station, who'd been good for business but not good enough for forever, who came from nothing and returned to nothing. At least that's what everyone thought. Octavia touched her stomach. Flat still, no visible sign of the life growing inside. She thought about calling Darius, telling him, then imagined his reaction, the accusation that she was lying, trying to trap him, desperate for money or attention or relevance. No. This baby was hers. Her secret. Her legacy. Not his. Her phone buzzed again. This time, an unknown number. She almost didn't answer, but something made her pick up. Octavia? Darius's voice, smooth, almost concerned. I heard you've been struggling. Listen, I know things ended badly between us, but I'm not heartless. She said nothing. Waited. I'm at the Starbucks on Peachtree, near your place. Simone and I were driving by, and I thought, maybe we could talk, clear the air, help you get back on your feet. The audacity. The calculated generosity designed to soothe his conscience while reinforcing her dependency. I'll be there in 10 minutes, Octavia said, her voice steady despite the riot in her chest. She changed into simple clothes, jeans, a cream sweater, flats. No makeup. Let him see her looking humble, defeated. Let him feel magnanimous. The coffee shop was crowded with evening customers. Octavia spotted Darius immediately. He sat at a corner table, Simone beside him. They looked like something out of a magazine spread. His arm draped casually over her shoulders, her hand on his thigh, the picture of wedded bliss. Octavia walked over, sat down across from them. Hey, Darius said, his smile warm in that practiced way. You look, well, liar. She looked tired. She knew it, felt it in her bones. Congratulations on the wedding, Octavia said, folding her hands on the table. The photos were beautiful. Thank you. Simone leaned forward, her voice dripping sympathy. I know this must be hard for you, seeing us happy. But we really do want the best for you, Octavia, don't we, baby? Darius nodded. Absolutely, which is why I wanted to see you. I know the settlement we offered was generous, but... He reached into his jacket, pulled out a checkbook. I want to help you get back on your feet. What do you need? First and last month's rent somewhere nicer? Money for professional development courses? He was writing a check, right there, in front of everyone, making a show of his charity. You don't have to do this, Octavia said quietly. I want to. He signed the check with a flourish. $20,000. You helped me build my business, Octavia. I haven't forgotten that. You were good for business. Simone's hand squeezed his arm. You're so generous, baby. The past tense wasn't accidental. We're good for business. Past, finished, done. It's okay to admit you're struggling, Simone continued, her tone shifting to something that might have been kindness if it weren't so clearly performance. It's okay to admit that maybe you weren't cut out for this world. The pressure, the expectations. She glanced at Darius. Some women just aren't built for it. Octavia's hands remained folded on the table, calm, still. But inside, something cold and sharp was calculating exactly how this conversation would be used against them later. You came from nothing, Darius said, sliding the check across the table. There's no shame in returning to something simpler, something more appropriate for your background. He leaned back, his arm tightening around Simone. You were good for business, Octavia. Simone's good for everything else. There it was again, the same line he'd used before, like he'd practiced it, refined it, decided it was the perfect summation of why he'd traded her in. If you know what it's like to be underestimated, comment below. What would you have done? You're not just watching. You're part of this movement. Octavia looked at the check. $20,000, a fraction of what she was owed, a tip to ease his conscience. She picked it up, tore it in half, then in half again, set the pieces on the table between them. I don't need your charity, she said softly, but thank you for the concern. Darius's smile faltered. Octavia, I should go. She stood, her movements deliberate and controlled. Enjoy your marriage. I genuinely hope you're happy. She walked out before either of them could respond. Through the crowded coffee shop, past the staring customers who'd watched the whole interaction, out into the cooling evening air. Her hands shook as she walked back to her apartment. She pressed them against her stomach. Still flat, still hiding its secret. She wasn't carrying his child for him. She was carrying her future, her empire's heir. The next generation of Kendrick power that would eclipse everything the Whitmore name ever touched. Inside her apartment, she locked the door, leaned against it. Let the tears come, hot, angry, cleansing. Then she walked to her desk, opened her laptop, accessed her encrypted server. On screen, 90 days until trust activation. Below that, a file labeled Operation Whitmore. She'd been building it for months. Every vulnerability in Darius's business, every over-leveraged property, every relationship she could exploit, every leverage point she controlled. She clicked it open, started adding notes from today's encounter, the public humiliation, the patronizing charity, the calculated cruelty disguised as concern, fuel. All of it was fuel. 90 days, 3 months. That's all she needed to wait. And then Darius Whitmore would learn what it meant to underestimate Octavia Kendrick. Everything was about to change. At 2 in the morning, 8 months pregnant, Octavia sat in her home office, coding acquisition algorithms while her daughter moved in her womb. The apartment was silent except for the click of her keyboard and the occasional rumble of late-night traffic outside. Her back ached. Her ankles were swollen. She'd eaten cold Chinese takeout for dinner at 9 p.m. because morning sickness had made eating earlier impossible. But none of that mattered. Not when she was this close. On her screen, 3 encrypted browsers, each logged into a different shell company. Phoenix Vale Capital was buying up debt on Darius's Charlotte properties. Athena Holdings had just secured liens on his Miami developments. Demeter Properties was positioning to acquire the parking structures adjacent to his Atlanta office complex. While Darius slept in his mansion with his new wife, Octavia was systematically dismantling the foundation of his empire, brick by invisible brick. Her phone buzzed. A text from Marcus Chen, her attorney. "Are you seriously working at 2 a.m.? You're about to give birth." "Can't sleep anyway," she typed back. "The baby's practicing kickboxing." "You're insane. In the best possible way." She smiled despite the exhaustion. Marcus was the only person who knew about her shadow empire, the only one she trusted with the full scope of her plan. Another kick from the baby. Strong, determined. Octavia placed her hand on her stomach and whispered, "Your mama's building you an empire, baby girl. Just hold on a little longer." The trust countdown on her screen read, 14 days remaining, 2 weeks, 14 days until she could reveal everything, until Phoenix Vale Capital could emerge from the shadows, until the woman Darius had discarded could show the world exactly what she'd built in silence. Octavia opened a new file, bank statements for all 3 shell companies. The numbers were staggering. Phoenix Vale Capital, $87 million in real estate holdings. Athena Holdings, $94 million in tech startup investments. Demeter Properties, $92 million in strategic property acquisitions. Total, $273 million in assets, all positioned to leverage Darius's over-leveraged empire. And in 14 days, the trust would activate. Her grandfather's $85 million inheritance, grown to $127 million through 5 years of strategic investment, would become accessible. Combined total, $400 million. More than double Darius's net worth. The numbers blurred on screen. Octavia blinked away exhaustion, forced herself to focus. She had purchase agreements to review, proxy representatives to brief, legal documentation to finalize. Her daughter kicked again. Harder this time. "I know, sweet girl. Mama's almost done." Octavia saved her work, closed the laptop, and stood, wincing as her back protested the movement. In the bathroom mirror, she barely recognized herself. The woman staring back looked haunted. Dark circles under her eyes, hair pulled into a messy bun, wearing an old Howard University t-shirt and sweatpants. Nothing like the polished wife who used to attend galas in designer gowns. Nothing like the woman in those wedding photos on Darius's Instagram. Young, carefree, convinced she'd found forever. This version of Octavia was harder, sharper, forged in betrayal and tempered by late-night strategy sessions. Once his partner, now his ruin, she whispered to her reflection. Once betrayed, now unstoppable. The mantra had become her heartbeat, the rhythm she worked to, the truth she was building toward. 5 days later, on a Tuesday morning in March, Octavia's water broke. She was in the middle of a video conference with her Cayman Islands financial advisors when the first contraction hit. Sharp, unmistakable. "Gentlemen," she said calmly, even as liquid pooled beneath her chair, "I need to reschedule. Something urgent has come up." She ended the call, grabbed her hospital bag, packed and ready by the door for 3 weeks, called an Uber. No husband to drive her, no family nearby. Her mother was visiting relatives in Baltimore, wouldn't return until next week. Just Octavia and the stranger driving a Toyota Camry through midday Atlanta traffic, while contractions came faster, harder, stealing her breath. "You got someone meeting you there?" the driver asked, concern creasing his face in the rearview mirror. "I'm fine," Octavia managed between contractions. "I've got this." Labor lasted 14 hours. 14 hours of pain that rewrote every understanding she had of physical limits. 14 hours of breathing through contractions, of nurses coaching her, of doctors checking dilation, of wondering if she'd made a terrible mistake doing this alone. But at 3:47 a.m. on March 12th, Maya Kendrick entered the world. 7 pounds, 4 ounces, perfect, screaming, alive. The nurse placed her on Octavia's chest, and the world stopped. Everything, the pain, the exhaustion, the betrayal, the revenge, all of it fell away in the face of this tiny, furious, beautiful human. "Hi, baby girl," Octavia whispered, tears streaming down her face. "I'm your mama. I've got you. I've got you forever." Maya's cries softened. She blinked up at her mother with dark eyes that would eventually turn hazel. And Octavia understood something she'd only intellectually grasped before. This wasn't revenge anymore. This was legacy protection. This was building a future where her daughter would never be dependent on a man's charity, where she'd never have to choose between love and financial security, where she'd inherit an empire built by a woman who refused to stay broken. Your story matters. Your strength matters. You matter. Hit like if you believe mothers are warriors, not victims. On Octavia's phone, ignored on the bedside table, a text from Darius appeared. "Need to finalize some asset division paperwork. Can you sign this week?" She didn't respond, didn't even look, just held Maya closer and whispered, "Your father doesn't know you exist. And that's exactly how we want it." 2 weeks later, back in her apartment with Maya sleeping in a bassinet beside her desk, Octavia opened her laptop. The countdown read, 0 days remaining, trust activated. Her phone rang. Marcus Chen. "Congratulations, Ms. Kendrick," he said, and she could hear the smile in his voice. "You now have full access to $85 million, plus the growth from 5 years of strategic investment. Total liquid assets, $127 million. Octavia looked at Maya, her chest rising and falling in peaceful sleep. "Combined with your shadow companies," Marcus continued, "total net worth, $400 million. $400 million. The number she'd been building toward for 5 years. The number that would change everything. "We're ready to emerge," Marcus said. "Phoenix Vale Capital can go public. Press releases are drafted. Business journals are prepared to run the story. The mysterious CEO's identity reveal is scheduled for Monday." "Do it," Octavia said softly. That night, while Darius celebrated another property acquisition at some downtown restaurant, completely oblivious to what was coming, Octavia sat in her modest apartment, holding her daughter and watching the pieces of her carefully constructed plan fall into place. Darius's company had just announced a major development deal, the biggest of his career. A luxury resort complex in Hilton Head. $200 million project. The press called him a visionary. His Instagram showed him and Simone at the announcement party. Champagne glasses raised, success personified. What the press didn't know, what Darius didn't know, was that Octavia owned every single parcel of land surrounding that resort. Owned the access roads, owned the utility easements, owned the marina rights. Through Phoenix Vale Capital, she'd quietly positioned herself to control everything that would make or break his biggest project. And on Monday, when the world learned that the mysterious CEO behind Phoenix Vale Capital was Octavia Kendrick, the woman Darius Whitmore had discarded, everything would change. She whispered to Maya, who slept peacefully, unaware of the empire being built around her. "Your mother isn't bankrupt, baby girl. Your mother is a billionaire." Countdown complete, but she wasn't done yet. The press release hit at 7 a.m. on Monday morning. Phoenix Vale Capital emerges as major Southeast real estate player. CEO identity revealed. By 8 a.m., every major business publication in the Southeast was scrambling to verify the story. Bloomberg, Forbes, The Wall Street Journal, Atlanta Business Chronicle. The mysterious investment firm that had been quietly acquiring properties and holding strategic assets for the past 5 years finally had a face. Octavia Kendrick. By 9 a.m., social media exploded. Octavia sat in her apartment, Maya sleeping in her arms, watching her phone light up with notifications. Twitter, Instagram, LinkedIn, her name trending, her story being told and reshaped with each retweet. The headlines got more dramatic by the hour. Dumped wife emerges as real estate mogul worth $400. How Octavia Kendrick built a secret empire while married to Darius Whitmore. The woman he discarded is now richer than him. By 10 a.m., financial analysts were dissecting Phoenix Vale Capital's holdings on CNBC. The anchor's voice carried equal parts admiration and disbelief. What's remarkable here is the strategic positioning. Phoenix Vale doesn't just own properties, they own leverage. They hold debt on approximately 60% of Whitmore Development's portfolio. They control access points, utility easements, and adjacent parcels that could make or break several major projects. The analyst pulled up a graphic showing the overlap between Darius's properties and Octavia's strategic holdings. This isn't random acquisition. This is 5 years of calculated positioning. Frankly, it's brilliant. "And she did this while married to him?" the anchor asked. "Apparently, without his knowledge. That's chess on a level most people can't comprehend." By 11 a.m., the hashtag #DarksOctaviaKendrick was trending nationally. The comment section became a referendum on gender, power, revenge, and justice. This is what happens when you underestimate a woman. She didn't just survive the betrayal, she weaponized it. Darius Whitmore fumbled the bag so hard he didn't realize she was the bag mothers, raising babies alone while building empires, men trading wives like cars. The story had everything social media craved: betrayal, secret empires, a villain who got his comeuppance, and a heroine who refused to stay down. By noon, news cameras gathered outside Octavia's apartment building. She watched from her window as reporters set up equipment, practicing their opening lines for live shots. Her phone rang. Marcus Chen. "You need to see this," he said. "Darius's CFO just released a statement." Octavia opened her laptop. The statement appeared on Whitmore Development's website. "We are aware of recent news regarding Phoenix Vale Capital. Whitmore Developments maintains confidence in our financial position and project pipeline. This matter does not affect our operations." The corporate language was careful. controlled. But Octavia could read between the lines. Panic, damage control, scrambling. His investors are calling emergency meetings, Marcus continued. 3 of his major backers want explanations about why Phoenix Vale holds so much leverage over their investments. Good, Octavia said softly. There's more. Phoenix Vale's representatives received a call from Whitmore's legal team. They want to negotiate. For what? They didn't specify. But reading between the lines, they're trying to figure out their exposure. How much control you actually have over their projects? Octavia smiled, cold, certain. Schedule a meeting, downtown, the Ritz-Carlton, conference room on the executive level. When? Friday. Give him time to sweat. That afternoon, Octavia did something she hadn't done in months. She went shopping. Not at the modest stores she'd been frequenting. She went to Phipps Plaza, walked into boutiques she and Darius used to shop at together, and bought Power. A crimson suit by Gabriella Hearst. Sharp, tailored, commanding, gold jewelry. Understated but expensive. Heels by Manolo Blahnik. Not the towering stilettos of her youth, but sophisticated pumps that spoke of authority earned, not demanded. The saleswoman recognized her from the news, tried to hide her surprise. It's really you, she whispered. I saw the story this morning. Everyone's talking about it. I need 3 business suits, Octavia said calmly. 1 crimson, 1 emerald, 1 midnight blue, and I need them tailored by Wednesday. Of course, Ms. Kendrick, absolutely. Wednesday afternoon, while Maya napped in her stroller, Octavia met Marcus at his law office to prepare for Friday's meeting. They're desperate, Marcus said, spreading documents across his conference table. Darius personally called my office 4 times. His lawyers are scrambling. Comment, I am divine. If you've ever been told you weren't enough, then prove them devastatingly wrong. What's his play? Octavia asked, reviewing the financial documents that showed exactly how much of Darius's empire she controlled. He wants to buy out your position. Offered $30 million above market value for the Miami properties. No. He's offering to restructure the Charlotte deal. Give you a partnership stake. No. Octavia. Marcus hesitated. He's going to offer you money. A lot of money. More than you'd make holding these positions long-term. She looked up from the documents. I'm not doing this for money, Marcus. I know, but I need you to be prepared for what Friday will feel like. Seeing him again, hearing his voice, he's going to try every angle. He can try. He's also going to bring Simone. That made Octavia pause. Why? Power move, showing he's moved on, that you can't hurt him emotionally. Octavia's smile was sharp as glass. Let him bring her. Let him bring whoever he wants. Friday morning arrived cold and clear. Octavia dressed carefully in her crimson suit. Applied minimal makeup. Pulled her hair into a low bun. Professional, powerful, unshakable. She arrived at the Ritz-Carlton 30 minutes early. Marcus met her in the lobby. Ready? He asked. I've been ready for 5 years. They took the elevator to the executive conference level. The room Marcus had booked overlooked downtown Atlanta, floor-to-ceiling windows showing the city sprawling below, glittering in morning sun. At exactly 10 a.m., Darius arrived. He looked different. Older somehow, though only 5 months had passed since the divorce. Stress showed in the lines around his eyes, the tension in his jaw. He wore a navy suit that probably cost $10,000, but it couldn't hide the man inside. Cornered, desperate, realizing too late what he'd lost. Simone walked beside him, her hand on his arm. She wore pale pink, soft, feminine, completely wrong for a business meeting. The choice was deliberate. A reminder to Octavia of everything she supposedly wasn't. Gentle, supportive, traditionally feminine. Darius stopped when he saw Octavia. Really saw her. Not the woman he'd humiliated months ago, but this new version, polished, powerful, sitting at the head of a conference table like she owned the entire building. "Octavia," he said, and his voice cracked slightly on her name. "Mr. Whitmore." She gestured to the chairs opposite her. "Please sit." The formal address landed like a slap. Mr. Whitmore, not Darius, not the name she'd whispered in the dark, called across rooms, said 1,000 times over 5 years of marriage. He sat. Simone followed, but her confidence had wavered. She looked around the room, at Marcus's expensive briefcase, at the documents spread across the table, at Octavia sitting there like a queen granting audience, and seemed to shrink. "I'll get straight to the point," Darius said, attempting to regain control. "Phoenix Vale's position in our properties is concerning my investors. I'd like to negotiate a buyout. Name your price." Octavia's expression didn't change. "No, I haven't offered yet." "You could offer twice market value. The answer is still no." Darius's jaw clenched. "You're doing this out of spite. I'm doing this out of business strategy. Phoenix Vale Capital holds valuable positions. Why would I sell?" "Because," he stopped, regrouped. "Because we could work together like we used to. You were always brilliant at market analysis, Octavia. We made a good team." Past tense again. We're brilliant. Made a good team. "The offer stands as written," Octavia said calmly. Simone leaned forward, her voice carrying forced sweetness. "Octavia, I know this is hard. I know you must still have feelings for Darius. But this vindictiveness isn't good for anyone. Can't we all just—" "This isn't vindictiveness," Octavia interrupted, her voice colder than Simone had ever heard it. "This is business. Phoenix Vale Capital operates according to market principles, not emotions." "But—" Simone looked at Darius for support. "We made a beautiful child together," Darius said suddenly, desperately. "Doesn't that mean something?" The conference room went silent. Marcus's head snapped up. Even Simone looked shocked. Octavia reached down beside her chair, pulled out a leather folder, slid it across the table with the same surgical precision Darius had used with the divorce papers months ago. "Sign these," she said quietly. Darius opened the folder. His face went white. "Termination of parental rights?" His voice rose. "You're trying to remove me as the father?" "Maya doesn't need a father who doesn't even know she exists," Octavia said. "You sent me divorce papers. I'm sending you these. Fair trade." "I didn't know. You never told me." "Why would I? So you could use my daughter as leverage? So you could play devoted father for the cameras while destroying me financially?" Octavia stood, her heels clicking on the polished floor as she moved to the windows. "Maya is mine, my legacy, my future. You're not part of that equation." Darius stared at the papers, at the woman he'd underestimated, at the empire she'd built in shadows while he paraded his new life in sunlight. "How did you do this?" he whispered. "How did you build all of this without me knowing?" Octavia turned from the window, looked at him with eyes that held no warmth, no anger, nothing but absolute certainty. "You taught me everything I know about real estate, Darius. I just learned to be better at it than you." She moved back to her chair, sat. "Now sign the papers or don't. Either way, Phoenix Vale Capital's position remains unchanged." Darius's hands shook as he held the pen. Simone grabbed his arm. "Baby, you don't have to." "Yes, he does," Octavia interrupted. "Because if he doesn't, I call my loans on the Charlotte properties, immediately." The threat hung in the air, clean, surgical, final. Darius signed. Each stroke of the pen looked like it physically hurt him. When he finished, Octavia took the documents, slid them into her briefcase. "Our business is concluded," she said. "Marcus will show you out." But she wasn't done yet. Darius's phone rang 48 hours after the meeting. His CFO's voice cracked with panic. Phoenix Vale just called the loans, all of them. We have 90 days to pay $140 million or they seize everything. The Charlotte properties, the Miami developments, the Atlanta complex, every over-leveraged asset Darius had celebrated, every deal he'd bragged about on Instagram. Phoenix Vale held the strings, and Octavia was pulling them tight. Simone sat across from him in their living room, scrolling through social media. "Baby, people are saying terrible things. They're calling you." She stopped, looked up. "Are we going to lose the house?" Darius couldn't answer. His empire, built over 15 years, was collapsing in real time. The investors were pulling out. The banks were demanding explanations. His business partners were distancing themselves, afraid of the contamination. And somewhere in a midtown apartment, Octavia Kendrick sat with her daughter and watched the dominoes fall exactly as she'd positioned them 5 years ago. His phone buzzed, a text from an unknown number. "Phoenix Vale Capital Offices, Monday 10 a.m. Final offer." Darius stared at the message. He had no choice, no leverage, no way out. He'd underestimated her, and now he'd pay the price. Monday arrived cold and merciless. The Phoenix Vale Capitol building stood 90 stories tall in downtown Atlanta, glass and steel reaching toward clouds that threatened rain. Darius entered the lobby wearing a suit that suddenly felt like costume jewelry, expensive but hollow. The security guard checked his ID, made a call, directed him to the express elevator. 89th floor, the guard said. 89. 2 floors above his own office at Whitmore Developments, located in the adjacent building. He could see his office from here. 87th floor. Windows dark because his employees weren't sure they'd have jobs next month. The elevator climbed. Darius's reflection stared back at him from polished steel, older, defeated, desperate. The doors opened to reveal an office that redefined power. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Atlanta, minimalist furniture in crimson and gold, abstract art that probably cost more than most people's homes. And there, behind a glass desk, sat Octavia. She wore crimson. Her hair pulled back severe and elegant. Beside her desk, a designer bassinet held a sleeping baby. Maya, he assumed. The daughter he'd never known existed. The legacy he'd forfeited. "Mr. Whitmore," Octavia said, her voice carrying the temperature of winter. "Sit." Not an invitation, a command. Darius sat, his hands shook. "I'm prepared to offer," he started. "You're not here to offer," Octavia interrupted. "You're here to accept." She slid documents across the desk, property transfers, asset assignments, the systematic dismantling of everything Darius had built. "Sign these, and Phoenix Vale restructures your loans. Refuse, and we seize everything in 72 hours. Darius scanned the papers. She wasn't just taking his properties, she was taking his legacy, his name, his future. "Octavia, please." His voice cracked. "We can work together like we used to. You and me, we were unstoppable." "We were never partners," Octavia said quietly. "I worked for you, remember? You made that very clear." Maya stirred in her bassinet, made a small sound. Octavia's expression softened for just a moment, then hardened again when she looked at Darius. "That's my daughter," Darius whispered. "Our daughter." "No." Octavia's voice could cut diamonds. "She's mine. You signed away your rights, remember?" He did remember. The papers she'd made him sign at the Ritz-Carlton. The termination of parental rights he'd agreed to because she'd threatened his Charlotte properties. "I didn't know what I was signing," he said desperately. "Yes, you did." Octavia stood, moved to the window. Below, Atlanta sprawled in afternoon light. "You knew exactly what you were signing. Just like I knew exactly what I was building while you slept, while you celebrated, while you convinced yourself I was nothing." Once his partner, now his ruin. Once betrayed, now unstoppable. Darius signed every document. Each signature felt like cutting off a piece of himself. The Miami properties, the Charlotte complex, the Atlanta holdings, all of it transferred to Phoenix Vale Capital, to Octavia. When he finished, she collected the papers with clinical efficiency, slid them into her briefcase, didn't say thank you or goodbye or anything that acknowledged the magnitude of what had just happened. "We're done here," she said. Darius stood, walked toward the door, stopped, turned back. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "Octavia, I'm so sorry." She didn't respond, didn't look up. Continued organizing documents on her desk as if he'd already ceased to exist. He waited, hoping for something, anger, acknowledgement, anything that proved he still mattered to her. Nothing. He left. The door closed behind him with a soft click. Octavia's assistant appeared from a side office, moved to close the blinds, giving Octavia privacy. The last thing Darius saw through the narrowing gap, Octavia lifting Maya from the bassinet, kissing her forehead, whispering something he couldn't hear. A family he'd never be part of. A legacy he'd destroyed. A woman he'd underestimated who'd risen so far above him she didn't even need to look down anymore. In the elevator descending, Darius caught his reflection again. The man staring back looked hollow, empty, irrelevant. His phone buzzed. Instagram notification. Simone had posted a selfie from their mansion. Real recognize real. Blessed life, power couple. But the comments were different now. Cruel, honest. How's it feel being married to a broke man? Octavia won. You lost. Simple. Congratulations, you helped destroy a queen and became a punchline. 6 months later, Octavia stood at her office window with Maya on her hip, watching the sun set over Atlanta. Below, the city sparkled with a million lights, each one representing someone building something, dreaming something, becoming something. She'd become part of that skyline now. Phoenix Vale Capital owned 12 buildings across the southeast. Athena Holdings had invested in 15 tech startups. Demeter Properties managed a portfolio worth $500 million. Maya babbled, pointing at the lights. At 6 months old, she had Octavia's eyes, her determination, her refusal to be ignored. "This is yours, baby girl," Octavia whispered. "All of it. Built by a woman who refused to stay broken." Her phone buzzed. A news alert. Whitmore Developments files for bankruptcy. Darius Whitmore steps down as CEO. She read the article once, felt nothing. Not satisfaction, not vindication, not even relief. Just the cold certainty of a plan executed perfectly. Somewhere across town, in a modest apartment that looked nothing like the mansion they'd shared, Simone Baptiste was learning what Octavia had known all along. When you help destroy someone powerful, you don't inherit their throne. You inherit their enemies, their debts, their karma. Once his partner, now his ruin. Once betrayed, now unstoppable. Once nothing, now everything. And she was just getting started. Octavia turned from the window, set Maya in her play area, opened her laptop. Phoenix Vale Capital's next acquisition was already in motion. A luxury resort chain, international expansion, legacy building that would span generations. She thought about Darius sometimes, wondered if he understood yet what he'd lost. Probably not. Men like him never did. They moved through the world, taking and taking, never realizing that some women keep ledgers, mark debts, wait for the perfect moment to collect. Her grandfather had been right. Let them underestimate you. That's when you strike. And Octavia Kendrick had struck with the precision of a woman who'd turned betrayal into empire, humiliation into power, nothing into everything. The best revenge wasn't destroying Darius. It was becoming so powerful that his opinion, his existence, no longer mattered at all. Hit like if you believe the best revenge is becoming so powerful, their opinion no longer matters. Subscribe to this channel for more stories where underestimated women rise without permission. Turn on notifications so you don't miss our next story about resilience, power, and the beautiful justice of building empires in silence. Comment below. What would you have done in Octavia's position? Your thoughts might inspire someone who needs to hear them today. Share this with someone who needs to know that betrayal isn't the end. It's the beginning of something greater.